first troops are not picked off until that day. So as the very, very first troops, only 7,669 men are lifted off the Dunkirk beaches on that first day. So and the Germans are closing in, and they're expecting it not to be more than 48 hours.
Okay, but just to be clear, Churchill's position is that even if they don't get anyone off the beaches.
Velkommen til telefonsvaren.
Absolutely. And so what happens is that afternoon, Halifax loses his temper, which is very rare, threatens to resign. Then there's a pause in the cabinet, and Churchill takes Halifax out into the garden of number 10. No one knows what he's saying, what he says to him, but he puts a proverbial arm on his shoulder. They have a chat, and when they come back in, there's no political resignation. But that first day is not particularly auspicious. I mean, 7,669 is, when you're only going to be, probably the whole of Dunkirk is going to fall in, estimated 48 hours. That is about 40,000 men, if you're lucky, probably less. 40,000 was kind of an upper level, I was expecting. They were kind of trumping that one day. I mean, they got 65,000. So later on in the week. So, but what Churchill understands, and this is what Halifax doesn't, is he doesn't have quite the same geopolitical understanding that Churchill has, is that actually Britain's strength does not lie in its army at all. The army has traditionally always been very, very small, and is very, very small. 10 divisions on the continent, compared to 105 that the French have. The division is the kind of unit by which we judge the sizes of armies in the 1940s, back in the 60,000 men. And he understands that the senior service is the Royal Navy, that they have the world's largest navy, that Britain has the world's largest merchant fleet, that we have access to around 85% of the world's merchant shipping, that we have a vast empire, that we're absolutely not alone, that we have, that we can absolutely hold on, that crossing the channel and defeating an island nation is incredibly difficult.
James, can I just jump in here? There are some historians, though, aren't there, who think that, given all that you've said, Britain has this great empire, that it has the fleet, that it has those resources, all the rest of it. Wouldn't it have been better in the long run to have done a deal? No, I don't think this, but they think it would have been better to do a deal with him, or indeed not have entered the war, to let Hitler and Stalin fight each other and knock each other out, as it were, and that the world would be, or that Britain would have been better placed at the end of the war if it had done Halifax's deal, if it had sort of husbanded its energies. Now you presumably think that.
Yeah, but Dominic, can I also just get back to the question I asked right at the beginning, which is what would the deal have been? Because the question of whether the deal would have been in any way kind of bearable surely is dependent on what that deal would have been.
Yeah, well, let me. I mean, they're both connected. I mean, the deal would have been a bad one for Britain. They would have lost a number of properties, certainly Gibraltar, Malta, lots of overseas territories, access to the Suez Canal, which would be catastrophic for India, which still remains a jewel in the crown at that point. Access to the Far East, of course, perhaps the forest doesn't happen at that point, but that is a massive source of resources out there. Global humiliation. And the problem is that, Hitler can't be trusted at all. That's been proved, so you don't know. You might have a deal in June 1940, but that stands as extremely unlikely. Large part of massive disarmament would be the key one, which would have involved into invasion later on. It would have been catastrophic.
Churchill himself says, doesn't he, that we would have had a naval fleet and we'd have Mosley put in charge.
Yeah, I think
that bad.
He might not have had. They might not have had to have a naval fleet. But it's a possibility. You're not going to bet on it either. I mean, the point is once you're negotiating about whether you keep your feet or not from the elements, it's all over. You've lost so terribly. It's about a reduction of everything that Britain stands for.
All right. Well, let's go back to the meetings. So, in the sort of popular imagination, Churchill prevails against the sort of Tory of Sir Halifax and Chamberlain. But my impression is that that's completely wrong. That Chamberlain's is the key voice, and that Chamberlain's kind of been maligned by popular history, which paints him as this sort of arch politic. Whereas in the crucial meetings, Chamberlain, isn't it, who says, no, Churchill is right, we must back Churchill. Can't trust it.
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate that we have verbatim accounts of every single word that's said in these cabinet meetings, and they're absolutely fascinating. And John Lucas's book, 5 Days in May, is 5 Days in London, whatever it's called. I mean, he's just completely brilliant on this. It's really vivid. It's incredibly compelling. And what you see is that Churchill starts to kind of stick up for Churchill on Chamberlain rather starts to stick up for Churchill on that Monday. And I think it's one of the reasons. I think the main reason why Halifax doesn't resign is because of the conversation that happens in the garden that we don't know about. But it's also because it's clear that Chamberlain is also starting to inch towards Churchill on this. He kind of keeps out of it to a large extent. It's really a back and forth between Halifax and Churchill. But on the following day, Tuesday, he absolutely does. And he says, no, you Winston. I'm paraphrasing, but Winston's great. You can't deal with these guys. I'm with Churchill on this. And since Attlee agreement, between Halifax, Chamberlain, and Churchill. And Chamberlain and Halifax are really, really tight. I mean, they're very, very good friends. They've been colleagues for many years. They're absolutely cut from the same sort of political cloth in terms of their outlook and all the rest of it. And you would, just from a personality point of view, you would expect probably Chamberlain to side with Halifax. Again, because he doesn't have that kind of global geopolitical understanding that Churchill does. And yet he doesn't. And that is a moment of greatness that's perhaps overstating it, but Chamberlain is a total lad in 1940. I mean, once he resides, he's brilliant.
You heard it here first.
Do you think that that Chamberlain does this because he's had dealings of how Hitler just doesn't do his work? I mean, he's kind of bringing his personal experience in.
Yeah, unquestionably. I mean, but I do think, generally speaking, I think Chamberlain is much more liked. I mean, you wouldn't have all those Spitfires and Hurricanes in 1940 to win the Battle of Britain if it hadn't been for Chamberlain. When he was Chancellor back in 1935.
As Churchill says when Chamberlain dies, isn't he? Later in the year, he gives a very moving threnody. Okay, so we're moving on to what really is the kind of the key question that everybody gets asked. So I'll just quote a question from splendidly named Ion Baboon. So we've got the army out, we're fighting on, and Ion Baboon asked, would Operation Sea Lion, the Nazi plan for the invasion of Britain, have been successful even if the Luftwaffe had control over the skies, because there's still the Royal Navy which still hasn't been beaten? So the question is, and I kind of know what the answer is to this, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Basically, how decisive is the Battle of Britain?
The Battle of Britain is incredibly decisive. Well, first of all, the first answer to the question is no, they couldn't have done it. I mean, not a hope in hell. I mean, just not a hope. You think how much jeopardy there is in 1944 when we're going, the Allies are going across to Normandy. The intelligence picture has to be absolutely spot on. We've got to keep guessing right up to the last minute. We have to have overwhelming air superiority far escape in Northwest Europe. We have to have overwhelming naval superiority as well as firepower and all the rest of it. All those things have to be met before you can even consider attempting a cross-channel invasion. I mean, Germany doesn't have remotely any one of those.
So why is the Battle of Britain decisive then?
Because it consigns Germany to a long attritional war that it can't afford to fight. and it makes the one thing that is absolutely guaranteed the moment Hitler comes into power in 1933, that there is going to be the God Almighty ding-dongs and ding-dongs against the Soviet Union at some point. Now, when this happens and what the conditions are and who actually wins is up for grabs certainly in 1933. But the point is that Hitler was originally planning for an invasion of the Soviet Union in kind of roughly 1943, possibly 1944. The idea is not to fight a global conflict; it's to fight a series of small conflicts, small, short-sharp conflicts, which Germany can win comprehensively. I mean, the whole German way of war is about annihilating your enemy completely, and he's hustled into an invasion of the Soviet Union before Germany is ready. I mean, the Luftwaffe is weaker in June, the third week of June 1941, which is where Operation Barbarossa is launched, than it was on the 10th of May 1940. And a large part of that is because there's a catastrophic loss, as they suffer in the Battle of Britain. But it's also, they're just not ready for a conflict on that scale, and they have to do that because Britain is still in the war, and hovering in the shadows is the United States with its huge manpower and industrialisation, all the rest of it. And he knows he has to beat the West to win the war, and he doesn't want to be fighting on two fronts for any longer than he absolutely has to.
But to stick to the Battle of Britain, because most people's sense of the Battle of Britain is that this is the key. If Britain loses the Battle of Britain, then we get invaded. But you're saying that even if we lose the Battle of Britain, there's no prospect of a successful German invasion of Britain in the summer of 1940.
No, the danger. I mean, say that RAF say they do successfully invade, then obviously that's catastrophic. Had we kind of sued for peace on the 27th, started opening peace feelers on the 27th of May or 28th of May or something, and Dunkirk's a failure, then they wouldn't have needed to invade Great Britain.
No, but I'm saying with the Battle of Britain, because it's specifically, we have this idea that the Battle of Britain is where, never so much saved by so many for so few. This isn't quite the pivot that most people traditionally think, then, is what you're saying.
Well, on paper, there is no reason to throw in the towel, and I don't think Churchill would have certainly let it happen, even if the RAF had been defeated. But my point is that the RAF is such a long way from being defeated. Hitler's failure to defeat Britain in 1940 is the decisive battle, as it turns out, in the Second World War. Above all, because it ensures that Britain carries on fighting, and it can which ultimately they can't win. I mean, if you just think about this, if you think about the middle of June 1941, Nazi Germany has won Great Britain. Fast forward to 6 months to middle of December 1941. It's got three enemies. It's got Great Britain plus Empire and Dominions. It's got United States of America and the Soviet Union. I mean, it is simply not going to win. The strategic earthquake of the Second World War that are twofold. First is Japanese attacks in December and the early part of December 1940. That's the second one. The first major strategic earthquake is the fall of France in May and June 1940. Everything else, I think, is pretty much predetermined.
James, let me take you back to the invasion. So, Tom and I have talked about these books, Are you genuinely saying there was no realistic prospect of a German invasion? I mean, all that strikes me is that's a very big claim to make, given we don't know the effect on morale and so on of even a small German landing. We don't know whether morale would have crumbled. We don't know how far the Germans would have got inland and so on. So, are you really saying you're certain that this was just never going to happen, never realistic? And an additional sort of question, side question, is, did Hitler even actually want to do it? Was he really ever signed up to Operation Sea?
Well, Hitler made some pretty crazy decisions in the war, and was not the soundest of military minds, it has to be said. But even he recognised that without control of the skies, there wasn't even a chance. Even if they had got control of the skies, and let's face it, you have to accept that in the Battle of Britain, out of 138 airfields, only one was knocked out from the projectile. So it was just a completely, it was an abject failure, every which way you look at it. But on top of that, there's something like 14 bomber command squadrons ready with chemical weapons to drop on any invasion fleet. The idea that we would know that the invasion is launching, within 24 hours of it being started is 24 hours before it being started is just ridiculous. And that they don't have any landing craft. They've got a few of these sort of ferries they've developed, which are kind of, they're absolutely woeful and completely not suitable for going across the channel. at all. The rest of them are Rhine River barges, and then most of them are motorised. So what they're having to do is they're having one motorised one towing two unmotorised barges. I mean, can you imagine anything more crap than that for a major invasion in 1940? I mean, it's simply not going to work. And you've got the world's largest navy, and they completely understand that. They completely get that militarily Britain is far stronger than defeat on the continent and evacuation of Dunkirk would suggest.
So hold on, James. Doesn't that then raise the question? Why does Churchill then do his "we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the landing grounds" if he knows there's no realistic prospect that they're going to be on the beaches?
Because that's all about because it doesn't. He knows that, but it also doesn't seem quite. When you've got hordes of lots of planes coming over, it still seems pretty intimidating. And he also understands that what everyone needs to do is come together, kind of realise that there is a big threat, take it really, really seriously, not be kind of lackadaisical about it in any way whatsoever, except there is a real threat, and all pull together, and that's exactly what happened. People breaking into houses and bullets and stealing stuff, but the country did come together. The free world came together in that instance. Lots and lots of Americans coming over as well. That's the other big reason why Churchill was ramping up the rhetoric, because he knew perfectly well that Roosevelt's worst nightmare was a Britain conquered or dominated by Nazi Germany. Suddenly the Atlantic is not the great barrier that it once was to their insular kind of non-militaristic approach to the world. That's all about encouraging the Americans to kind of beef up war manufacturing and all the rest of it, and come in on their side. That's why we need our 40 destroyers and all this kind of stuff. Most of them, which ended up as kind of breakers offshore in 1944. So they're never much use. But that's not the point. I mean, there are lots of American observers coming over. And so what they wanted to do was say, this is really serious. This is the threat. This is what we're looking at. If we don't pull our finger out, there's no room for complacency whatsoever. And yet these American observers would come over, people like Chewy Spots and stuff, who ended up coming over, really senior air commander later. Were coming over and reporting. Chewy Spots, yeah. And
is that a genuine American name?
Well, Tui was his nickname. He was really called Carl, but Spots was his surname. But S-P-A-A-T-Z, and he was reporting back, going, "I can't see how the Luftwaffe could possibly win. This is Britain's absolutely fine," and that's exactly what we wanted to say.
So we did, I think, the entire history of Persia in 40 minutes.
We've taken longer than that to do about 3 weeks.
So we should probably start moving to the end. But we've had Dunkirk, we've had the Battle of Britain. Of course, the other famous event in British history that happens in 1940 is the Blitz.
Do you think
both government and the general population have an appreciation of the fact that victory in the Battle of Britain means that large-scale bombing is kind of inevitable? Is it something that they're waiting to happen, or does it come as a surprise?
Well, no, because the large-scale bombing happens in the middle of the Battle of Britain. So that launched on Saturday, the 7th of September 1940, and tactically it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. They're trying to, if their stated aim is to try and destroy the RAF, they're much better off targeting airfields. But the problem is they just don't have enough bombers to do the job. I mean, so the Battle of Britain is still going on. I mean, we're still a week and a day away from what becomes Battle of Britain Day, 15th of September, which was his birthday, 1940.
My beloved wife.
Yeah. So it's just it's starting to happen, and that is in retaliation to bombing Berlin. So the RAF bombs Berlin four times before Luftwaffe deliberately bombs London.
And it's always said that is a deliberate attempt. Is that true? Is it that this is a deliberate strategy to try and annoy the Germans into stopping bombing the airfield? Is that true or not?
No, it's to show it's really to show that they can do it, and to show that they're not just sitting back and taking it, that they're still in the game, that they're showing Germans that they haven't won, that British bombers are going to come over, and this is what you can expect. I mean, you have to also, one has to remember that despite the sort of terrible scenes in the East End, terrible scenes in Southampton, Liverpool, of course Coventry in November 1940 and all the rest of it, I mean, it is very, very, very small beer indeed compared to what the Germans are going to receive later on in the war. I mean, the total tonnage of bombs that are dropped on London in the Blitz between September the 7th and May 1941 is 18,000 tons. I mean, that is, on France alone in the run up to D-Day. So, that is the kind of comparison we're talking about. But the interesting thing is the Germans just don't have enough of anything to do what they're trying to do in the summer of 1940 to defeat Britain.
The conclusion that I would come to from listening to you is that basically Germany had lost the war even then. That Germany had almost, in a sense, Germany had lost the war from the very beginning. I mean, you're painting a picture in which it's actually very hard, listening to what you say about Britain's great strengths, its supply network, its allies, its dominions and so on. Germany's weakness, Germany, they don't have enough to do this, they don't have to do that. Is that not the conclusion that you would come to? Which in that case, if that's obvious to you, how come it's not obvious to everybody else at the time?
Well, it is to a certain extent. I mean, Churchill says, well, that's exactly what happens. I mean, I think you can say, argue convincingly that it is definitely all over for Germany by November 1941. When Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, has failed, I don't think there's any way back. But I also don't think there was a huge amount of chance of that working either. The odds were stacked against Barbarossa because despite the kind of developments of vast Soviet armies and the rest of it, although it looked very bleak if you were Stalin, and there was the day of panic, I think it was the 16th of October 1941, where they're all fleeing Moscow and burning papers and all the rest of it. Even so, that was still a huge stretch because of the huge logistical chains that were it was made more, the reason it's unlikely to succeed is because they've been hustled into it. And the reason they've been hustled into it and launching it in the middle of June 1941 is because they've lost the Battle of Britain. And the whole point is, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Britain is still in the game, America waiting in the wings with all this industrial might, clearly siding with the Allies. So we need to knock Britain out, but we're not strong enough to do that. So we're going to have to go and get the wealth of the Soviet Union, and then we can turn back and face Britain.
So 1940 is actually the beginning of the end.
Yeah, I think you could. Yeah.
Well, I think we've seen off the Germans, Tom.
I think we have.
I think that's
put them in their place.
I think that's all. That's about it for today's The Rest is History. James, thank you so much. I've been waiting ages for somebody to come on and show Tom precisely how you do this podcast, and I thought it would bite all the more if it came from his younger brother. So it's great that you've come on and put him in his place.
Well, we could do an episode on Elder and younger brothers.
Do you know, I was actually thinking, Tom, that would be a great subject. Harry and Wills, so much to play with.
So much to talk about.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be on, and it's been great fun, and I never need any second invitation to talk about 1940.
Jolly good.
Well, and also, if people haven't had enough of you, there are also 300 episodes of We Have Ways of Making You Talk as well.
That's a hell of a lot of tanks, Tom.
So there's a lot of Second World War. Thanks so much.
We will be back next week with a bonus live episode on Wednesday, so do please put that in your diaries and we will see you then. Goodbye for now.
Pip pip. Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.
Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to restishistorypod.com. Or, if you're listening on the Apple Podcasts app, you can subscribe within the app in just a few clicks. In the year 1066 occurred the other memorable date in English history, viz. William the Conqueror, 1066. This is also called the Battle of Hastings. When William the Conqueror landed, he lay down on the beach and swallowed 2 mouthfuls of sand. This was his first conquering action and was in the south. Later, he ravaged the north as well. The Norman conquest was a good thing, as from this time onwards, England stopped being conquered, thus was able to become top nation. So says W.C. Seller and R.G. Yateman's classic 1066 and all that. Who am I to disagree? Welcome to The Rest is History with me, Dominic Sambrook, romantic, freedom-loving heir of the Anglo-Saxons, and grey, grim Tom Holland Norman to his fingertips.
Thanks, Dominic, for that introduction. Do you know, I have actually played William the Conqueror on national TV.
Of course you have.
So, yes, so I am a sleek, evil Norman to my clean-shaven chops.
So when people mistake you for actor Tom Holland, I mean, you are actor.
Yes, I am an actor.
I mean, he's the impersonator.
Well, I think that anyone who saw my performances within Normandy would accept that it was a magnificent thespian performance.
Yes, his casting by Marvel was just a colossal case of mistaken identity. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
pretty
seen
much.
William the Conqueror.
Pretty much. It's taken the time to
So
get
anyway,
onto the
Tom.
Spider-Man jokes, but we finally,
Yes.
after 45
God.
episodes, we got onto it. So well done on your
There has been
strength.
self-restraint on my
Yeah,
part.
it's been heroic.
So Tom, when I was at school, like you, like probably a lot of my listeners, I learned there was one date that you had to know in English history. It's the defining date of English history, 1066. Now, do you think that it deserves its place in school?
Well, we have a question on that, don't we, from Richard Duval, who asks, is 1066 a genuine pivot point in English history? And I think...
So give us a sense of what happened, I suppose.
Okay, so before we come to that, essentially, I think it is because it's a kind of great scorch mark across the line of medieval English history. And on the one side, you have the period that we call commercially the Anglo-Saxon period, and then we have the period from which we start dating our kings and queens. So there were lots of, there were at least 2 Edwards who ruled as King of England before the Norman conquest. But we start counting Edwards from the 13th century. And that's just a kind of a single indicator of the way in which essentially the Norman conquest serves to completely reorient everything. And I think it's 1066 matters and is indeed decisive because over the course of the millennium since, people have seen it as such, and so have kind of constructed entire mythologies around it. The idea, very popular in the 17th century, of the Norman yoke. The idea that England has never been invaded since, which of course isn't true, but it establishes an idea of England as freedom-loving that has incredible influence through the 19th and 20th century. So I think it matters for those reasons. But it's also, I think it matters in the context of the 11th century, because essentially what the Normans represent is this kind of revolutionary movement which is escalating on the continent at the same time as the Norman invasion. And it's both a military revolution and a religious revolution. And the Norman conquest is very much part of that story, so we might get onto that later on.
I would never have believed you would have found a way to fit religion and religious revolution
yeah, but that was
into the story of 1066.
but this
Fantastic work, Tom.
This is the 11th century.
It is.
The 11th century
very
is
religious.
it's not just very religious. This is the great seismic. This is the moment of revolution, the papal revolution that transforms the medieval world.
There is no century that you don't say that of.
The 11th century, I've always said, is the revolutionary century, and I think it makes sense to see 1066 in that kind of broader perspective.
Let me get back on your English. Tell us what happened at 1066 in about 10 sentences.
Try, yeah.
Sweep if that's doable.
There's a reason why students, when they go to secondary school, study it in year 7, because it's a very inherently dramatic story, and basically it's a kind of 3-way Game of Thrones. You've got Harold Godwinson, son of an overmighty earl. You have Harold Hardrada, Harold the Hard Ruler, the King of Norway, and you have William, Duke of Normandy, the most kind of terrifyingly able man in France. All of whom essentially have their eyes on the crown of England, and the Crown of England becomes available on the 5th of January 1066, when the previous king, Edward the Confessor, dies childless. And so there is this massive scramble. Harold Godwinson has himself crowned very rapidly in the newly built Abbey of Westminster. This provokes William to fury, because William thinks that both Edward the Confessor and Harold are committed to him succeeding to the throne. Meanwhile, Harold Godwinson's brother Tostig has had a massive bust-up, has left England in a huff, has gone off to Norway, where he's talked to Harald Hardrada, a terrifying Viking of the old school, persuaded him that he could come over and grab the throne. So, over the course of 1066, you have these three men all competing for the throne. It's in the shadow of Halley's Comet, a sure portent of doom and disaster. Harold Godwinson is stationed on the south coast of England, waiting for the Normans to invade. Contrary winds stop William from crossing the Channel. While he's down there, he's brought the news that Harald Hardrada and Tostig have invaded, have sailed up the Humber, have defeated the Earls of Northumbria and Mercia, have seized York. Harold Godwinson marches at a furious speed, takes Tostig and Harald Hardrada by surprise, defeats them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. He's just breathing a deep sigh of relief when he's informed that the Normans have landed on the south coast. So he hares back down there, meets them at a hill some 7 miles north of Hastings. A battle is fought all day. Harold ends up dead. William ends up waits for the Anglo-Saxon nobility to accept him. They don't, so he starts to ravage the south. This is sufficiently effective that on Christmas Day 1066 he is able to take possession of London, and on that day he is crowned in Westminster Abbey as King of England. So it's an incredibly dramatic story, and I'm sure again part of the reason why it has this seismic role in English history is simply that it's so dramatic and in lots of ways unusual.
It's a great story. Well done, Tom. That was a bravura performance, and it is a kind of Game of Thrones, isn't it? But what's interesting to me about it, just thinking about it before we're recording, is that in the popular imagination is the sort of period of bucolic Anglo-Saxon peace, and then these bastards arrive from Normandy and burn everything and smash everything up. Norman conquest is this great traumatic rupture. But the interesting thing is that England is very rich. England is very, has a very sort of potent state, raising taxes. It has the sort of shires and all the rest of it. But England has kind of been up for grabs for a while. So England has been invaded by the Danes. It's been run by Canute, been part of the North Sea Empire, and the Norman influence has been getting stronger in England for decades, hasn't it? The Norman conquest. So Edward the Confessor is half Norman. He's got Norman friends. He's given lands to some Normans. In a way,
yeah, and Harold Godwinson is half Scandinavian.
So exactly. So isn't this basically England is going to be taken over by one of these two sort of powers, in either Norway or Normandy, both Viking powers basically, and it's inevitable. Do you not think? Do you think this basically it's going to be dragged into the orbit either of Scandinavia or of Normandy and France? And the only question is which.
I think it was always going to be that of France. I think it was always going to be because of this the scale of this ongoing kind of revolutionary ferment in France. But you're right that it is also. Essentially, England is too rich and too successful. It sounds like an odd thing to say, but the unitary kingdom of England that gets founded in the 10th century is incredibly precocious by the standards of the rest of Europe, where this kind of centralised nation-state doesn't really exist. And you mustn't overemphasise the centralisation. I think the north is very roughly controlled, but it is there are recognised boundaries. There's a single faith. There's almost a kind of single language. I mean, the dialects are kind of pretty much mutually intelligible. There's a single religion. There's a single king, and there are these kind of incredible abilities to raise taxes. So it's by the standards of other lands very, very wealthy. But that's a problem because you're surrounded by robbers. So it's kind of like walking through, a place where there are lots of muggings with wearing a kind of, wearing diamonds or something. I mean, it's kind of asking for trouble. And the Vikings, this is incredibly appealing to them, of course. So they come over, and it's in the reign of Ethelred the Unready. Canute establishes his reign, absolutely. Essentially, that Harold Hardrada, in that sense, is kind of old school, because what he's doing, Vikings have been doing pretty much since the reign on Lindisfarne, is basically kind of come in and grab stuff. William, I think, is different, because he although Harold Hardrada is Christian, and indeed is the half brother of the man who will become always patron saint of Olaf. He's Christian in the sense that everyone has to be Christian.
So he doesn't believe it.
I don't think
He's not a turning the other cheek man.
he's very much not a turn the other cheek man. For William, it's different, because William really passionately believes that God wants him to have the throne, and that Edward the Confessor, I think he's right to do this. I think Edward the Confessor had promised him the throne. Harold Godwinson, in a famous episode that appears on the Bay Tapestry, a year or so before 1066, has been shipwrecked and essentially rescued by William from captivity, and he has sworn an oath on the bones of saints that he will back William's right to the throne. And William,
Or is that a story just told by propagandists?
I don't think so.
How true is that?
I think it's
You think it's real?
Yeah, I think it is, because I don't think Harold will go away otherwise. I mean, the debate is over why Harold has gone there. So the English sources say that he's to ransom some captives, some hostages that William has, and the Normans say that he's been sent there by a confessor. I think the English sources there are probably true, but I think it's pretty clear that Harold did do it. And the reason that Harold does this is because he doesn't take it seriously. So there's a fabulous description of him in one of the in the life of Edward the Confessor, decades so after 1066, where it refers to his watchful mockery that he takes from ambush to ambush. And I think there's a sense that he feels it doesn't really matter. And I think more than that, that he's in Normandy, he's able to scope out William and exactly calculate what he is up against. But the problem for Harold is that William is signed up to the idea that essentially, if he is going to England, he will be doing so as the agent of God. And as proof of
So he's
that,
got a papal banner.
he has a papal banner, which is very shocking, because it's none of the business of the papacy to intervene in this kind of thing. This is a period where the reach of the papacy is nothing like what it becomes even within a decade or so. Because this is the period where reformers in Rome are starting to use the papacy as a way to bring the whole of Christendom to heel, as they see it, to subject it to a process of reformatio. And England is a massive prize. England is a kind of ancient Christian country, but the Archbishop of Canterbury, a guy called Stigand, is absolutely representative of everything that the reformers in Rome is like. He is corrupt, he holds multiple benefices, he does not take his faith seriously at all. And so the chance to bring England to heel is hugely, hugely tempting. And the guy behind the Pope, who essentially persuades the Pope, Alexander II, to give a banner with a papal blessing to William, is a guy called Hildebrand, who in due course will become Pope Gregory VII. And Gregory VII is the great revolutionary Pope of the 11th century. And he's the guy who, at Canossa Castle in the Apennines, will get Henry IV, the Emperor himself, to kneel in the snow and humble himself. And essentially the humbling of Harold is a part of this. And people who are opposed to what Gregory VII are doing, opposed to what the reformers are doing, opposed to this policy of essentially kind of shaking Christendom up, cleansing it, purifying it, making it more truly Christian, they compare Gregory VII, Hildebrand's approach to Henry IV, and they cast it as kind of rebellion, as upstart behaviour, as revolutionary behaviour. They explicitly compare it to what William had done to Harold. The murder and dismemberment of a Christian king.
Yeah.
So I think that is a massive, massive part of the context for it. And that's why when, after the Battle of Hastings, William builds a great abbey on the site where Harold fell. And the high altar, Battle Abbey. So Battle Abbey, the high altar is supposed to stand on the spot where Harold fell. And this is a gesture of penance that for William is a truly heartfelt one. And everyone, all the Normans who fought at Hastings have to do penance for the death that they inflicted. So there is a kind of sense.
So the Normans are kind of, they're more Christian. They wear their Christianity more heavily than Harold and the Godwins and their sort of hangers on. Is that fair?
I think so. They are militant in their Christianity. In a terrifying way.
And a sort of allied question. So lots of novelists, I think of Julian Rathbone wrote a book on this called The Last English King. Lots of novelists have written about this, and of course it's the stuff of children's history books. And we always attempted to project personalities onto these characters. So we're going to come to Harold Hardrada later because there's lots of questions about it. It's this amazing character. Harold Godwinson, for lots of people, is this kind of romantic hero, falls basically after a massive fiction fire. And William is kind of so you know yourself. So he's kind of this grim, very political, very intense, supremely competent, terrifying figure. How much of that do you think is us projecting personalities, sort of Hollywood style, onto these people who are basically, they're basically competing warriors, right? They're leaders of gangs. They're pretty scary people. Who now we would think of as kind of the equivalent of Vladimir Putin and sort of they're tough guys. And are our modern impressions of them basically romantic conventions?
But they've been mythologized right from the beginning. So the image, so the story that Harold Hardrada is the hero of Icelandic song. So there's all this stuff about how he goes off to Byzantium, how he fights dragons, how he has affairs with empresses, how he conquers the Holy Land. I mean, it's all totally made up. And it draws on the fact that Harold Hardrada, as a young man, did go to Constantinople, did clearly cut a tremendous dash with Varangian Guard, came back with lots of cash, made himself, and with which he was able to win war bands and win the crown of Norway. I mean, clearly he's as my brother would say, a massive lad.
Like Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, like Neville Chamberlain. He's a terrifying. I mean, of course he's a terrifying guy, and that's why people write epics about him. Harold Godwinson, likewise, is. I mean, this is a guy who's fighting the Welsh, and gets given the head of the Welsh prince who has been fighting, and treats it as a trick.
Yeah.
Now, to the Normans,
is he's kind of listening to poetry and holding hands with Edith wife,
Swanbeck. Yes.
Yeah, and he's loving kind of Anglo-Saxon traditions and all that. That's all balls, is it?
I think he's Harold Godwinson is a charismatic man. He must have been to win the support of essentially. You see, Harold Godwinson is he's a kind of a decent Richard III. He's a usurper, like Richard III. There is an atheling, a prince who should become king in the form of Edgar. Edgar is the grandson of Edward Garnside, English king of Canute, who died. Edward Garnside's son had been Hungary. He'd come back to England. He died almost immediately. Edgar is the son. He's only about 1066, so he's not really able to have the crown. But even so.
He's the rightful heir.
Harold Godwinson elbows him out of the way. I mean, but doesn't kill him. So he's a nice.
Right.
But he's a charismatic man to persuade all the other noblemen to sign up.
Yeah, but a usurper is only a usurper. Is only remembered as a usurper. Yeah, usurper. They're just part of the canon. So no one thinks.
Also, it's more confused because the laws around who becomes king is it's more up for grabs. Essentially, it's an elective office. Then get sealed with a coronation. So Harold, he's elected king. So he clearly is charismatic, and I think you get the sense from that thing of him, watchful one. I think that's written within his lifetime, and I think that's clearly true to the style he brings to kingship. He's an amused kind of man. William, I mean, he's terrifying because he's terrifyingly able, and he's terrifying in the way that very, very competent revolutionaries are invariably terrifying. And the thing is that the revolution is not just religious; it's also military, because this is the age of two very, very significant developments, one of which is the realization, particularly in Anjou, who William fights against for decades before he launches his attack on England. The Angevins recognize that you can use castles as tools of oppression.
Yes.
So they start...
There's no word in English for castles.
No.
When Normans come over.
No.
People don't know what they are.
No, they've got no idea. Whereas all along the Loire, the early chateaux are going up, and essentially the Angevin counts are able to use these chateaux as ways of establishing themselves as kind of power. They come from almost nowhere to become the major power in central France. And the Normans pick up on this very, very quickly, the scope for castles. And William, as a boy, he becomes Duke very, very young. So he has to put up.
Hej.
Velkommen til.
Mange tak, mange tak. Jeg har noget årskort her, jeg prøver på. Det var her.
Ja. Jeg tænker på kort og
Jeg kender den efterhånden.
Det er jo. Det var en dejlig dag.
Tak lige måde.
Tak for det.
for... Jeg har lige noget, jeg skal ordne, ikke også? Ja, næsehorn, det er fint. Tak for det.